standing here in St. Joseph's Catholic Cemetery. This is the older section, and it's directly north of Oakland Cemetery, which is just this way. I'm standing here under a beautiful mammoth oak tree. I'm not an authority on trees, but I would estimate from what I gather that this might be 200 years old, and it was here before the cemetery. Jack Bach, who's in charge of the business affairs of the cemetery, indicates that this was probably laid out in 1860 or possibly earlier. So the tree must have been here before the cemetery. As I stand here looking to the southwest, I can see the dome of Old Capitol. This is one of the high points in Iowa City. And as I look there at the dome, the gold dome, it seems to me that it's just about the same elevation as my white head. So it is a very, very high point. I also see the steeple of St. Mary's Church as I look southwest. As I mentioned in my article in the Press Citizen on St. Joseph's Cemetery, the focal point of this older section is this 30-foot cross, this 30-foot stone cross just behind me. And around the cross are buried some priests and some nuns who served the different Catholic churches in Iowa City. To my left are 5 stones from different priests who served the churches. Father Schulte, Monsignor A.J. Schulte, is buried here. He served the church for 49 years, coming in 1891 and serving until 1940, the date of his death. And right here in the front of me is the stone of Father F.J. Ward, who served St. Patrick's Church for many, many years, and who baptized many Iowa Cityans, probably more of them of Irish descent, because the Irish people went to St. Patrick's Church. There are 3 other priests who are buried here. They were before my time. I didn't know them, but their service to the church is commemorated here. And over on the other side of this giant stone cross are the graves of the different nuns, the different sisters who served the church, either in the school or at the church. And there, I believe, are 22 of them around here, and then there are some others further to the east. Now we're going to go over to the Simeon Hutz stone, which is rather an interesting stone, and it adjoins this place right here. This is the stone of the Simeon Hutz family. Simeon Hutz was quite an important individual in the earlier years of Iowa City. He operated a brewery on the southwest corner of Market and Lynn Street. It started out, well, the building is still standing. To begin with, it was just half the size of what is there now and which is used by the Economy Advertising Company. But that's where he started his brewery, and at one time there were 3 breweries in the city of Iowa City, all at one time. The Englert Brewery, the Dostal Brewery, or Great Western, and the Simeon Hutz and Xavier Geiger Brewery. Geiger was the grandfather of Waldo Geiger, who was a present-day Iowa Cityan. Simeon Hutz and Geiger put a marker along Market Street, about halfway the length of the building. It's about 6 feet wide and 8 feet long. As you drive west on Market Street, if you look to your left, you'll see this stone slab, and on it says Simeon Hutz and X. Geiger, who were the ones who started that brewery. I was down in St. Mary's Church in the new hall that they have under the church last Sunday, and in glancing at the history of the church, I noticed that Simeon Hutz was one of the building committee when the church was built and consecrated August 15th, 1869. I'm sure he would be very surprised if he could see the crawl space that he knew under that church now made into a very elegant hall. This is the grave of Philip Clark. Clark was one of the first two men to claim land in Johnson County. We mentioned that story when we were in Oakland Cemetery, and we talked about it also when in our program on the town of Napoleon. John Gilbert met Eli Myers and Philip Clark in Rock Island and brought them to Iowa City, or to this area in 1836. They picked out their sites, went back to Elkhart, Indiana, got their tools and families, and they came back. Clark is buried here in St. Joseph Cemetery. Gilbert and Eli Myers are buried in Oakland Cemetery. Now we'll go over to the grave of Roy L. Chopik in the far north side of the cemetery. This is the stone that marks the grave of Roy L. Chopik, who was the first Iowa City boy to be killed in World War I. He was killed in France. The American Legion post in Iowa City is named in his honor, and it's located on Muscatine Avenue at the extreme east part of Iowa City. Chopik was a member of a long-time Iowa City family with many brothers and sisters, and the family was well known. Rather interestingly, just on the other side of these trees is the cut that was made when the Lyons to Council Bluffs Railroad was projected. They got as far as Iowa City, and then they ran out of money, or the project just fell apart. I remember hearing about it because my grandfather had invested $100 in it. In those days, everybody put money into the project to get a railroad. If a town got a railroad, it was made. Now we will go on over to the new section of St. Joseph Cemetery, which is off to the northeast of where we are now. This is the Vogel Memorial Chapel, which has been given to St. Joseph Cemetery by Frank Vogel and Elsie Seamuth Vogel in memory of the deceased members of their family. It's rather ironic that the first committal service in here was that of Mrs. Vogel. The area just to the west of the chapel is what is known as the priest section. And in that area are four Catholic priests who from Iowa City or serve the Iowa City churches. Monsignor Carl Meinberg, Monsignor who served St. Mary's, Monsignor P.J. O'Reilly, who served St. Patrick's Church, Reverend Nugel, who served St. Wenceslas, and Father A.U. Hauber, who served in Ottumwa, but who was an Iowa City boy. This cemetery was opened in 1945. At that time, the old section of St. Joseph Cemetery was pretty well filled, and so this is where all the graves are today, except old family groups who still have space in their graves in the old section. So now we will go out to Memory Gardens on Muscatine Avenue, and then to the Jewish Cemetery on Linder Road. Thank you. I'm standing here in Memory Gardens. It's a private cemetery in the east part of Iowa City. It's on the north side of Muscatine Avenue, just north of Towncrest Shopping Center. Memory Gardens was started in the 1940s, so of course there are not nearly as many burials here as there are in Oakland and in St. Joseph's Catholic Cemetery. I believe the office here at Memory Gardens told me there are 2,176 who are buried here in Memory Gardens. And then they have added in the last few years a mausoleum at the far end of the cemetery, the north end. And they will have accommodations there for 576 burials. Some will be ashes and some will be caskets. There have been, of course, some rather outstanding Iowa Cityans who have been buried here. Mason Ladd, who was Dean of the College of Law for many, many years, is buried here. Ernest Horn, who was a professor in education and for whom an Iowa City school on the west side is named. Then there are a number of coaches out here. Leonard Raffensperger, who was the Iowa football coach. Bucky O'Connor, who was an Iowa basketball coach. Glenn Devine is buried up here. Frank Bates, who was a longtime Iowa City coach, is buried up here. Helen Lemmy is buried here. There was a school named for Helen Lemmy. Her husband Alan, is also buried up here. So there are many Iowa Cityans who are buried up here. In this cemetery, it's different from Oakland in that there are no stones. The grave markers are all flush with the ground, which has certain advantages, but it's also more difficult as we walk through the cemetery to see these the markers. Thank you. This is the Jewish cemetery. This is the last cemetery on our tour, our walks through the cemeteries of Iowa City. It's located on the Linder Road, directly north of Iowa City. In fact, on the other side of these bushes is Interstate Highway 80, and Linder Road is along on this side. Actually, the present Jewish cemetery is the second Jewish cemetery in Iowa City, and the first one was located on this same spot. It was started back before the turn of the century when there was a small group of Jewish people in Iowa City. They were very prominent. Max Meyer was the postmaster. He also was very active in promoting Iowa football and was sometimes referred to as the father of Iowa City, of University of Iowa football. Well, these Jewish people left Iowa City, and after they left, the graves were removed to other cemeteries, and so the property, the land, was sold to a man by the name of Sam Whiting. Whiting owned it for some 20 years. It grew up with many trees in this area, and then about 1920 or 21, the present Jewish congregation in Iowa City bought the property and established the present cemetery, which is here now, which is well tended and well cared for. When you look off to the north, you can see the original gate, the stone gate, and on each of the corners are the stones which were connected with the cemetery. The cemetery is for the people of the local synagogue. My Jewish friends are trying to teach me how to pronounce Gudus Achem, but I know I can't say it properly. But anyhow, the cemetery is for them. Occasionally there have been other burials here, people who did not belong to the synagogue, and they are buried over in the northeast corner of the cemetery. There was one couple who was going through Iowa City. They were Jewish. Their baby daughter, 2 or 3 years old, they were living here temporarily, died. They wanted the child to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, and so she is buried over in this corner. There's another grave over here for a little girl who was killed when she was about 10 years old. Her mother was Jewish, her father was not. So they wanted the child to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, so she also is buried in this northeast corner of the cemetery. So the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery now, is well cared for and well tended. And this concludes our trip through the cemeteries of Iowa City. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.